practice, how you do business, the whole shebang. Getting this difference is absolutely key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about.
So think about what the world was like before this. The source paints a picture of a world running on myth and superstition. Knowledge wasn't something everyone had access to. It was basically monopolized by a select few. Priests, tribal chiefs, storytellers, and they used these stories to keep their power. If you were just a regular person, there was no real way for you to check if what they were telling you was true. And that brings us right to the heart of the argument. It's what the source calls a fundamental epistemological reset for all of humanity. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple and totally world-changing. So, what on earth is epistemology? Well, it's just a fancy word for the theory of knowledge. It's all about asking, how do we know what we know? Where does truth actually come from? And the argument here is that this mission didn't just add new knowledge, it completely reset the rules for what could even count as knowledge in the first place. So a whole new system was put on the table, and it was built on principles that, honestly, look a lot like the modern scientific method we use today. First, you had to demand verifiable evidence. Second, you had to use logic and reason. Third, and this is a big one, any claim had to be falsifiable. That just means it had to be testable, something you could potentially prove wrong. And finally, you were told to consult people of knowledge, actual experts, not just whoever was in charge. And it all kind of boiled down to this one simple but totally revolutionary question. Where are you getting this from? Or, what's your source? Just asking that question flipped the whole script. Suddenly, the burden of proof wasn't on the person listening anymore. It was on the person making the claim. For the first time, really, on a massive scale, if you said something, you had to back it up with evidence. So, what happens when an entire civilization starts thinking this way? When everybody starts asking for proof? Well, according to the source material, it directly sparks an explosion of scientific and empirical discovery. All of a sudden, the search for knowledge wasn't just some hobby for smart people. It became a sacred duty. It was seen as an act of worship. Think about that. The laboratory, the library, these became holy places. Because the thinking was to understand the universe and how it works was to get closer to the one who created it. And this new way of thinking just unleashed a golden age of knowledge. It was spearheaded by these incredible scholars who saw their scientific work as a divine responsibility. We're talking about giants like Jabir ibn Hayyan, often called the father of chemistry, or Ibn al-Haytham, who basically invented the science of optics. These guys weren't just tinkering, they were literally founding entire fields of science. And the results? They were just staggering. I mean, look at the pillars of modern science: chemistry, physics, biology, medicine and surgery, sociology, mechanics, optics. The argument is that all of these fields were either born from scratch or massively advanced because this new method of thinking was applied to understanding the natural world. The source also points out a pretty interesting difference in motivation. Today, a lot of scientific research depends on getting grants and funding. But back then, the Islamic sciences were driven by something else, a religious duty to understand the world, a personal quest for truth. The reward wasn't a paycheck, it was fulfilling a secret mission. But here's the thing. This huge transformation wasn't just about new methods for looking at the outside world. It also required a change on the inside. You couldn't just have a new way of thinking. You had to create a new kind of person, someone who was actually capable of seeking truth without their own ego getting in the way. This internal work is called tazkiyah of nafs. The basic idea is the purification of the self or the ego. It means actively working to remove all the stuff inside that gets in the way of seeing the truth clearly. Things like our biases, wishful thinking, arrogance, you name it. The goal was to become like a clean, clear vessel, ready to receive knowledge without distorting it. And to do this, a whole new self-identity was forged, one that balanced two really powerful concepts. On one hand, you're an abd, a servant of God. That keeps you humble, open to being wrong. But on the other hand, you're also a khalifa, a steward or a trustee on earth, and that gives you this incredible sense of responsibility to learn, to build, and to make the world a better place. So what kind of person does that create? Well, this internal recalibration produced individuals who were just naturally driven to explore, to question, to research. The humility of being a servant made them open to the facts, even uncomfortable ones, while the responsibility of being a steward pushed them to go out and seek that knowledge. And all of this leads to the ultimate legacy of this great reset, the idea of truth itself being elevated to a sacred core value. Truthfulness wasn't just a nice-to-have social skill anymore. The source really hammers this point home. It became a sacred metaphysical value. It was a non-negotiable pillar of who you were as a believer. As the saying goes, you just can't be a Muslim if you're a liar. It's that fundamental.
And this wasn't just some abstract idea. This sacred value for truth became the gold standard, the operating system for every part of society. Whether it was a contract in the marketplace, testimony in a court of law, an observation in a scientific lab, or a treaty between nations, all of it was supposed to be built on this rock-solid foundation of truth.
So ultimately, the source presents this entire shift as the awakening of humanity. By swapping out myth and superstition for a real methodology for finding truth, and by making that search a sacred duty, it freed people from the control of those who used stories and authority to exploit them. It empowered everyday people to seek knowledge for themselves. And that brings us to our last thought, something to really chew on. Forget about any one religion or philosophy for a second. Just ask yourself, what changes in a society, or even just inside you, when the search for what is true becomes more than just a goal, when it becomes a sacred, driving mission? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.